Cities that have serial killers that have never been caught. Albuquerque, New Mexico has the West Mesa Bone Collector. Back in 2009, he was suspected of killing 11 women with a possible 19 more. He got his name because the skeletons were all that was found. There was no clothing or other trace evidence. They were found buried in a remote stretch of the desert. The Long Island serial killer, better known as Lisk, killed at least 10 people back in 2010 and 2011. They believe this killer has actually been caught, and his name is Rex Hauerman, but they're unsure if it's actually him or not. Now, that man has definitely been arrested for murders. They just don't know if the Lisk killer was actually him. Coincidentally, the killings did stop whenever he was arrested, but this could be a serial killer looking for a scapegoat and moving on to a new area. League City, Texas, there was multiple bodies found between 2003 and 2006 in an area that they deemed the killing fields. All these bodies seem to have the same MO, but no killer was ever caught. All of his victims were women, and though there was only about 4 bodies found, they do suspect there's more, and they just haven't found them yet in that gigantic, vast area. Atlantic City, New Jersey had a string of strangulations back in the late 2000s. They were all women, and no one was ever identified. The Oklahoma City Butcher was active throughout the 70s and 80s, leading to multiple deaths of women, and he has never been identified. There's not been hardly any leads in that actually, and it is still an open case. Then you have the Interstate 40 dumping ground that stretches across Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Tennessee, where there is more than 200 open cases alone between those 3 states of women found dumped on the side of the road. That doesn't even count the amount of open cases of people that have gone missing on that stretch of interstate. The FBI does not believe that as one serial killer, rather as many serial killers working on that same strip of road. There is a high estimate that ranges between 1 and 500 active serial killers on the Interstate 40 route. Be safe out there traveling for Thanksgiving this year, because you never know who might be lurking in one of those towns that you're going to visit.
Welcome to the OG community, where curiosity is encouraged and questions are explored. Here, we look at hidden history, symbolism, world events, and mysteries that make people stop and think. They haven't always been truthful with us. There's some guys that are still roaming these streets that a lot of us, many of you, don't know about. But before we get into this video, let's make sure everybody stopping through is hitting that subscribe button. Be a part of the OG community. And for my day one OG community members, the ones that support me and watch these channels on a regular basis, I want to give you guys a shout out and thank you. And make sure you smashing that like button and hype me up when you can. Well, without further ado, let's get into this video.
That the FBI actually started what's called the Highway Serial Killer Initiative.
One more time. The FBI Highway Serial Killings Initiative.
Correct. And
which is basically just a big, it's kind of a glorified cold case file.
Yeah, we're going to keep an eye on this.
Yeah,
we're going to start looking into this.
It's deploying resources to, law enforcement all over the country. Right. They say at any given time there are at least 50 active serial killers in the U.S.
Correct.
And God knows how many of those are truck drivers.
I was trying to say, I don't know how many bodies are out there that ultimately when this guy gets picked up, because he'll fuck up eventually. He will get picked up eventually. They will indict him. They will pick him up. They will charge him. He will be on trial at some point.
You think they'll get Carl Ashworth?
Absolutely. At some point, I know for a fact he's going to end up spilling his guts, and he's going to tell where there's all kinds of fucking people spread out throughout the United States. The police actually have physical evidence that links Ashworth with, I believe it's 2 women and a male, where they've actually found DNA in 2 women and a male. Now, here's the thing about that is that when they brought him in, this is how he first came to their attention, obviously, when they brought him in, that because he's been arrested, I'm pretty sure the DNA was already in the database. They pulled him in. Mm-hmm. They sat him down. They said, hey, listen, you've got your DNA in 2 victims, or, 2 bodies. I'm sure they said bodies. So here's the thing. Here's where most serial killers, or people in general, fuck up.
Mom, where were you? Why didn't you save me?
Hemos recibido aviso del hallazgo de 4 cuerpos decapitados de mujeres asiáticas en las afueras de Mexicali. Hoy queremos dar a conocer unos de 4 mujeres desaparecidas. La primera es Sakita Kakita Yoshimamo, Tuculito Kakita, como mucho gato.
Did you know that one man killed 49 women and dumped their bodies in a river for over 20 years without getting caught? In 1982, the first body was found floating in the Green River near Seattle. Then another, and another. Gary Ridgway hunted young women working the streets, picking them up in his truck. He strangled them with his bare hands, watching the life drain from their eyes. Then he drove to remote areas and left their bodies like trash. For decades, detectives had no leads. They interviewed Ridgway twice, but he passed lie detector tests. He seemed like a normal family man. In 2001, DNA evidence finally linked him to the murders. When confronted, Ridgway confessed to killing 49 women. He remembered details about each victim that only the killer would know.
Watsonville continúan las autoridades la búsqueda de 6 mujeres desaparecidas en poco más de un mes. Se trata de Mela Pelasgay, Josía Prieto, Débora Vergotas.
Mela Pelasgay, Josía Prieto, Débora Vergotas, Dolores Delano, Tepesta Eloy, Rosa Melchuchu.
8 serial killers who were never caught. The last one will blow your mind. Number 1, the Zodiac Killer murdered at least 5 people in California, sending encrypted letters to newspapers and taunting police, but was never identified despite massive investigations. Number 2, Jack the Ripper brutally murdered at least 5 women in London in 1888, and over 100 suspects have been investigated, but his identity remains unknown. Number 3, the original Night Stalker committed 50 rapes and 12 murders across California in the 1970s before vanishing, and DNA evidence still hasn't identified him decades later. Number 4, the Axeman of New Orleans killed 6 people with an axe between 1918 and 1919, sending letters to newspapers demanding jazz music be played or he'd kill again. Number 5, the Servant Girl Annihilator murdered 8 women in Austin, Texas in 1884, dragging victims from their beds and mutilating them before disappearing forever. Number 6, Bible John killed 3 women in Scotland in the 1960s, quoting scripture before murders, and composite sketches led nowhere despite thousands of tips. Number 7, the Doodler targeted gay men in San Francisco in the 1970s, sketching victims before killing them, and witnesses refused to cooperate, fearing outing themselves as homosexual. Before I say the last one, make sure to hit that follow button to support the channel. Number 8, the Long Island serial killer dumped at least 10 bodies along Ocean Parkway and remains active with investigators finding more victims, but no credible suspects after over a decade.
8 couples were murdered in the Tuscan countryside between 1974 and 1985. The killer left almost no trace, not a fingerprint, not a witness, nothing. Italian police called him the Monster of Florence. What followed wasn't just a failed investigation. It was a slow collapse into madness. Detectives built theories that kept changing. Innocent men were arrested, tried, and eventually released. One suspect died in prison. Another spent years behind bars before the charges fell apart. The case consumed everyone who touched it. Then an American crime writer named Douglas Preston moved to Tuscany specifically to research the murders. He befriended a local detective who had spent years chasing the killer. Italian prosecutors eventually accused them both of being connected to the crimes. Preston had to flee the country. The detective was convicted, and the actual killer, whoever he was never found. He may have been watching the entire time, living quietly somewhere in the hills, reading the newspapers, watching the wrong men get destroyed. Nobody knows his name to this day.
My family and I are on a weekend fishing trip in Arkansas, and I thought, what a wonderful place to kill someone. Out here in the woods by the river. And as I thought that, I wanted to search to see if somebody had actually got away with it. And I found out that Arkansas actually has 3 notorious serial killers that have never been caught. one that operated as recent as 2021. This was happening in Little Rock, Arkansas. 5 victims were assaulted and only 1 survived. Out of those 5, the only thing they shared in common is that they were either homeless or in transitional housing, meaning that he was probably perfecting his skills before he moved on. Even though the FBI never caught him, their official statement was a serial killer doesn't stop after such a violent spree. So 3 possibilities remained. He was perfecting his technique before he moved on to a different area, or changed his MO, and he is still actively in that area and they have not put together the other cases he's responsible for. The second possibility is that he is incarcerated for another unrelated crime. The third possibility is that he is someone that has turned up deceased, and that's why the killings did stop in that area. Now, these sprees lasted from late 2020 to early 21, and no one has ever been identified. We have a little bit of CCTV footage that can connect the 4 kills to each other and the 5th attack, and the 5th person that lived described him as being an African American, slightly over 6 foot tall, with a slender build and a nice haircut. Now, what that means technically, he said, is it looked like he just had a fresh haircut and it was somebody who seemed to care about their appearance. When you have that little bit of information, it seems that it is a monster preying upon the weak and the people that don't have anyone else looking out for them, which is why the FBI does think that he was taking those crimes of opportunity to perfect his skills on people that he knew the police would not investigate as heavily on. Whether we want to admit that or not, the homeless and the transitional house people are not heavily investigated as if it would have been a suburban family that was attacked. To this day, no one has been arrested or a suspects list has been made on the Little Rock, Arkansas serial killer. Now, I thought this trend might just be a recent thing, and there is a history in Arkansas of serial killers going uncaught. The Phantom Slayer of the 1940s claimed 8 lives, and to this day has never been caught. Somebody is growing up out there with a grandfather and a father, possibly a husband or a brother, that is a notorious serial killer known as the Phantom Slayer of Northern Arkansas. If you have any information on this, you can report it to the Little Rock, Arkansas police. If you guys know any details from that late 2020 to early 2021 time period, I'm sure they would much appreciate that. But that just got me thinking, while I'm out here camping in the woods, who's camping next to me? Out here in the darkness of Northern Arkansas.
The Doodler was an unidentified serial killer active in San Francisco between 1974 and 75. He's linked to 6 confirmed murders, possibly up to 14, and 3 surviving victims. He met victims at gay nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. One survivor said the killer had a strange habit of sketching small animals on a diner napkin to start a conversation. The nickname came from his practice of drawing his victims before stabbing them in similar positions from the front and back. Police believe the victims died after meeting him near the same areas, often close to lakes or Ocean Beach, where the bodies were found in remote spots. Many victims had defense wounds, showing there was a struggle. The case stalled because survivors refused to testify, fearing stigma and being outed. A detective even identified a suspect and put him under surveillance, but there was not enough evidence to charge him. Without solid forensic proof, the case went cold. It remains open and a $250,000 reward is still offered for information.
He reacts jokingly at first.
Mr. McCurley, I enjoy gang camp.
Detective Wagner saying, "We got him."
Detective Wagner asks McCurley where he left Carla's body. He starts giving directions, insisting it was beside a building, but this isn't where Carla was found. This raises red flags for the detectives. She may not be the killer's only victim. When they try to push him for answers, the 77-year-old suspect completely shuts down, leaving Wagner with nothing. But the thought that McCurley might have been a serial killer all along has never escaped his or Detective Wagner's minds. Since Carla's murder, several women and girls have been abducted and killed around Valentine's Day in the Fort Worth area, each of their cases remaining unsolved to this day. And another family is now also painfully aware of these facts, the McCurleys. A few days before the trial, Roddy McCurley, the killer's own son, tries desperately to get answers from his father.
If there were other crimes, I wanted him to give those families some peace and confess to those things. When I looked into my dad's eyes, I saw nothing.
These are active serial killers who haven't been caught yet, part 1. Up first is the I-70 killer. The I-70 killer is an unidentified American man who killed 6 store clerks across the Midwest in 1992. Victims were typically young women who were petite and brunette. The one male victim had long brown hair which he often wore in a ponytail, so it is theorized that this killer mistook him for a woman from a distance. Also, the I-70 killer is suspected to be behind 2 more murders in 1993, an attempted murder in 1994, and 1 more in 2001. His only surviving victim is 35-year-old Vicky Webb. She briefly talked to him before he shot her, but he just left her there for dead, and the bullet didn't properly penetrate her and she survived. Next up is the Long Island serial killer, also known as the Craigslist Ripper. This person is believed to be active from 1996 to 2010. Authorities came to this conclusion after 10 bodies were found on the Long Island coast between 2010 and 2011. There are 8 other potential victims, some of whom have never been identified. Most of the victims were known to sell adult services on Craigslist, and several people have been suspected of being the Long Island serial killer, like this man, John Bitrolf. He has been charged with 2 confirmed murders, but is suspected for another 15 to 20, making him the #1 suspect of being the Long Island serial killer.
If y'all see, there's serial killers everywhere. Everywhere. It ain't just one place, they everywhere. That's why you got to be so careful who you trust, who your neighbors is. The social media thing has allowed them to even be more discreet. Now they can just get so much contact with people online because we no longer go out and talk in person. Everything is on social media. We're meeting through social media apps. We don't get a chance to go out and get a feel of who a person is before we actually start going out with them. That's the problem. Now you meet somebody and they're a serial killer. Look at all these places. Look at all these women. Look at all these men.
Entirely at large and active.
Top 5 American killers that still haven't been caught. The Long Island serial killer. He is believed to have murdered at least 10 people in the Long Island area between 2007 and 2010. Despite an extensive investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies, the Long Island serial killer has not been caught. One of the reasons the killer has eluded capture is the lack of forensic evidence and the fact that the victims' bodies were often dismembered, making identification and cause of death more difficult. If you have the guts, follow for the next serial killer.
This next case, I'm going to do an age restriction on it because this one is a little graphic. This is about a serial killer who killed in the state of Ohio, which when I thought of Ohio, I immediately thought Dahmer. Apparently Dahmer was from Ohio, but he was killing in Milwaukee.
Is it me, or does it seem like there is serial killers, uncaptured people? Now, I know we caught a lot, but there's a lot we have not caught. Even the FBI admits there's a lot of serial killers out there that's uncaught that they don't know of. They think half of them are truckers. That's why we got to be paying attention out here. Paying attention. And who knows? Who knows that these guys are really serial killers? How do we know? These could be the aliens that's capturing people, taking them underground for food. Where they're stuffing them in the back of these big four-wheeler trucks. Who knows? We got to think, and we got to pay attention, because it's safe, but it's not safe out here. Go places with people you trust. That's the only way to go, because you never know. Especially women who may appear to be weak. Don't get me wrong, biologically, the average woman is weaker than the average man. Women, be safe. Men, look out for these women, because you never know who's watching. Let's get back into this. It's scary out here.
This person never got caught. So let's get into it. The Cleveland Torso murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, was a serial killer who struck between 1935 and 1938 in the Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Youngstown area of Ohio. He killed dozens, but some believe that there may have been as many as 40 victims. Now, if you do the math, that's like one victim every month, I think. 12, 24, 36, a little more than a body a month. The victims were usually homeless, working class people whose names were never known. Only 2 or 3 were ever ID'd for certain. The murderer would decapitate them while they were alive and dismember them and pour oil or acid all over their body. And for you men that were the victims of him, he cut another thing off. That the first victim, an unidentified man, was found September 23rd, 1935 in the Jackson Hill area of Kingsbury Run by 2 small boys who were unfortunately at the wrong place at the wrong time. They yelled for help, screaming, "There's a body down there, and he doesn't have a head." And I can't imagine being a child seeing that, how horrifying that must have been. The second victim was found on the same day, 30 feet from victim number 1. He was identified as Edward W. Andersey, who is 28 years old. On January 26, 1936, Florence Genevieve Polio was found at 2315 East 20th Street in downtown Cleveland. 5 months later, on June 5th, a male, known only as the Tattooed Man, was discovered in Kingsbury Run. He had 6 tattoos on him, one with the initials WCG and another with the names Helen and Paul. It says his underwear also had the initials JD, but despite police's great investigation into trying to ID him, they got nowhere. On July 22nd, another unknown male victim was discovered in the Big Creek area of Brooklyn, west of Cleveland, the only victim found on the west side. Then another unidentified man, the 4th, was found dead on September 10th at Kingsbury Run. You thought he only killed males? No, he killed women too. The first unidentified woman, nicknamed the Lady of the Lake, was discovered on February 23rd, 1937, near Euclid Beach on the shore of Lake Erie. Then on June 6th, another woman was found beneath the Lauren Carnegie Bridge. She was believed to be Rose Wallace, who had vanished 10 months earlier. Exactly 1 month later, a man was found dead in the Cayuga River in the Cleveland Flats. The venue was the same for the next female victim found on April 8th, 1938, and on August 16th, another female and a male were discovered on East 9th Street, Lakeshore Dump. Now that is all I have on the
He
crime
wasn't
itself,
playing no
but
games.
there is a small little blip about the aftermath. It says,
He would kill
where
him.
Ohio, USA, when Monday, September 23rd, 1935 to Tuesday, August 16th, 1938, the aftermath. There were only 3 suspects for the murders, but nothing more than circumstantial evidence was ever found or available, and no prosecution was ever brought, despite the best efforts of one detective named Elliot Ness. Can you imagine the frustration of having not 1, not 2, 3 potential suspects for a crime like this, and you're getting nowhere with charges? How unbelievably frustrating that must have been. And I don't have the names of those people. I don't have any information about who they were, if one might have been a butcher, or what made them think these people were the culprits. I got nothing. But if any of you guys know, let me know, because I'm curious really who these 3 suspects were and what made them even believe that they were suspects in the first place. And if any of you guys live in Ohio or have heard any other stuff about this crime, let me know. And I'll see you guys in my next video then. So, bye.
For ritualistic purposes. Since these murders, investigations have been ongoing and updates have been minimal. However, these murders did shock the region of Africa, and the UN has actively inserted themselves in the situation to try to, quote, continue to make sustained efforts to protect civilians. And for the final entry on this entire list, we have a man named Vampire, a Kenyan serial killer who was active from 2022 to 2024, and in that time killed a confirmed 42 women. Vampire is a 33-year-old Kenyan man in Nairobi, and after his 42-woman killing spree from 2022 to 2024, he actually was arrested, but shortly after being arrested, escaped custody and has not been heard from or seen since. It is believed by some in Kenya that the police actively aided in the escape of the serial killer, which is extremely disheartening if true. As we conclude this video, I do just want to make a quick reminder that everything I discussed in this video is real. These are real victims with real families and real friends and real lives destroyed and ruined and taken. I try my absolute best to make these videos informative and respectful.
Believes that multiple serial killer truckers are currently on the loose, hunting for victims along American highways. Take a look at this map from the Highway Serial Killings Initiative database. The red dots show where remains have been found along highways over the past 30 years. Well, right now, the FBI believes at least 850 murders are linked to long-haul truckers.
We started noticing within our database a number of bodies along the side of the road. Victims kept coming up as prostitutes, specifically truck stop prostitutes, and one after another our main suspects or confirmed offenders were identified as truck drivers. They're extremely difficult to track down, and the mobility of their occupation allows them access to so many different areas of victim selection and then victim release locations.
When Frank Figliuzzi, a former FBI assistant director for counterintelligence, heard the disturbing data, he realized that he needed to zero in. So he spent a year riding more than 2,000 miles in a semi to research the subculture and find answers. Well, that research culminated in his new book, Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. And he writes, quote, part cowboy, part fighter pilot, part hermit. Long-haul truckers glide along the edge of a certain seam in the fabric of our society, the seam that separates their reality from ours. Killer truckers exploit that seam. Well, the book explores some notorious cases like that of Robert Ben Rhodes, the man known as the truck stop killer. He was finally busted in April of 1990 when a state trooper pulled him over in Arizona. But that trooper was not prepared for the shocking discovery he made. A woman chained inside of the truck's cab, screaming, covered in red welts and lacerations with only slippers on her feet. Well, police soon learned that that man had built a torture chamber in the rear of the semi FBI it is possible he killed as many as 50 people. And this author joins us live. We're so glad to be speaking with him about more on his new book. Thank you so much for making the time tonight.
Thank you, Natasha, for helping get the word out.
Yeah, so the FBI says at least 850 murders are linked to long-haul truckers. Did you find any other troubling data in your research?
Yeah, the numbers don't get any better. So 850 roadside murders of women, mostly sex-trafficked women, but not all. And then there are 200 of those murders that are considered unsolved and active investigations. And when I asked the FBI, how many suspects are you currently looking at? The answer is 450 within the trucking community. In fact, 25 long-haul truckers are already serving time in prison for murders as part of this initiative, but that has not made a dent in the unsolved cases.
What makes it so difficult to pinpoint these murderers to get to the bottom of these cases?
You know, these 18-wheelers are essentially mobile crime scenes. They'll grab a victim in one jurisdiction, they'll rape or murder her in a second jurisdiction, and they'll dump the remains in a third jurisdiction. So that's challenge number one for law enforcement as they try to determine who they have on their hands in terms of a dead body and putting a name with the body, let alone identifying who's done it. And then you've got the nature of the victims. They are almost all sex trafficked. That means that the families may not even know that they're missing. So it's tough to get someone to champion their cause with the law enforcement community. And that's part of what I hope will happen with this book.
Yeah, certainly. This forgotten population, I think that a lot of times they do not get the light that they deserve on their case. You know, and obviously most truckers are not serial killers. We have to say this. Can you speak about the experience with the trucking subculture that you found going all of those miles in a semi-truck? What did you learn about the isolation, the general lifestyle, and the implications for a serial killer?
Yeah, I put my investigator hat back on after retiring from 25 years in the FBI, retiring as assistant director, and I came away incredibly impressed with the hard work and dedication of the American trucker. In fact, in part, I dedicate my book to the stalwart American trucker. The data in terms of their impact on the economy is astounding. We know that grocery stores would run out of goods in 3 days if truckers stopped, but there is a dark side to long-haul trucking. And I ask the question, you know, nature or nurture? Is it a predilection to kill and to be violent against women that attracts some people to the long-haul job and certain kinds of trucking? I go deep into that. We know that studies show that 44% of truckers are exhibiting signs of major clinical depression. 20% of them binge drink 5 or more drinks at a sitting, and 10% of truckers say they drink alcohol every single day.
That is so important. And we're almost out of time, but very briefly, what is your biggest recommendation for the FBI as they investigate all of these unsolved cases, all of these murders that may be linked to these long-haul truckers? Out of the research, What is your recommendation?
As an investigator, I tried to narrow down that pool of 450 suspects by focusing on the question of corporate drivers versus owner-operators, and specifically what kind of truck are we talking about that might lend itself to being the killer. My recommendation would be that they focus on the type of trucking and the nature of the truck being driven.
It is a fascinating topic and such a deep dive. And look, the book again, Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. Frank Figliuzzi, I really appreciate your time and insight tonight. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
I think the public needs to know this. If you're traveling this summer for vacation or for the holidays, listen up. As of right now, the FBI is hunting down 500 truck driving serial killers. Before I get into it, if you're traveling this summer, you're going to want to be cautious traveling on I-40. So this has been going on for the past 20 years, but it's ramping up. So the FBI is guesstimating that around 1,000 plus women have been murdered by long-haul truck drivers. But that's not all. They also have murdered 2 couples as well at truck stops. And these are the weirdos they're catching. So this is actually a chilling last picture of this girl before she was murdered. Basically what they're doing is they're targeting SEX workers at truck stops and unsuspecting women. What they're doing then is basically torturing these women in the back of their trailers for as long as they possibly want to, and then they end up just murdering them. But the body count is just getting higher and higher, basically so high that they're letting it be known to the public. So the sad part is a lot of these working girls don't have a choice. Either their PIMPs are saying, hey, you gotta go in that truck or else, or hey, you're not gonna get your DRU.
Don't watch this alone.
Outside the state hospital, where a few hours ago, the serial killer, known as the Boogeyman, famous for snatching children from their bedrooms in the middle of the night, escaped.
Toby, it's bedtime.
I don't want to go to bed. The Boogeyman will get me.
The Boogeyman isn't real. Now go to bed.
Yes, he is.
Toby, bedtime. Toby? What's wrong?
The Boogeyman's in my closet. Got you!
Very funny. Go to bed. What is it?
The Boogeyman's under my bed.
Toby, no more games. It's bedtime.
I'm serious. Will you check?
Fine. You better not be trying to scare me again.
I'm not.
There's no one here.
Alright, we about to go over some serial killers who might still be on the loose. Let's get it. Well, first we got the Chicago Strangler. The Chicago Strangler typically victimizes black women. Most of their murders were in the west and south sides of Chicago. So next time you sign to the rack, you better watch your back. Next we got the I-70 killer. He got his name because most of his victims were found just a few miles off I-70. He always targeted store clerks, especially when they was alone. After he would murder them, he would then rob the store. This guy is believed to be between 52 to 70 years old today, so I'd say he's not that much of a concern. Me personally, I'm not letting no senior citizen do me greasy like that. Up next, we got the smiley face murder theory. This theory got its name because there was at least a dozen men found drowned in water. And nearby each of the spots that the police think the bodies were dumped, there was a spray-painted smiley face. There's approximately 45 murders that could be connected to the smiley face murders. That's not very smiley.
But even those aren't all of them. And in a press release...
First, the smiley face murder, Jones, that's been going on for years. Leaving the smiley face. I mean, that's been going on for years. They've never been able to link anybody to those crimes. And there's been so many bodies found with that smiley face next to it. Nobody has found a suspect, not even close to finding a suspect. It just makes you wonder how you get assassination on attempt on Trump and they find out this whole man's life within 30 minutes. But you got these serial killers going around and you haven't been able to find the bodies to some of these murders. You haven't been able to find over, what they say, 450 serial killers they possibly looking for. That is crazy. That lets you know how many crazy people it is out here. But I tell you one thing. You come this way getting crazy, I'm going to get crazy with your ass. Can believe that. You can bet your last dollar on that. I ain't playing.
The FBI has even stated explicitly that a disproportionate amount of murderers and serial killers have been truck drivers, simply because their lifestyle is so conducive for serial killing. They're consistently traveling city to city, they're hanging out in locations that are relatively temporary, rest stops, gas stations, and they always have a reason to be going somewhere. And truck drivers and trucks, for the most part, kind of fly under the radar. In regards to the I-70 killer specifically, the authorities don't know what his occupation was, but they do believe that he was either a truck driver, a drifter, or somebody who traveled on I-70 frequently for work. So I guess all I can say is, if you're traveling on I-70 and see a man who looks something like this, keep your distance. The Eastbound Strangler. The year is 2006. You and your dog are staying in a cheap motel outside of Atlantic City because you've fallen on pretty hard times, and you decide to go out for your daily walk. You walk your dog on the usual route around the motel when you notice that your dog is particularly inquisitive about something behind the motel. He keeps trying to draw you down to this drainage ditch, and while you're unwilling to go down there, you figure something suspicious is going on. You get back to your room and inform police, and after they arrive, they knock on your door and tell you that what you called them about was extremely concerning, and what was found in that drainage ditch was extremely disturbing. Inside that drainage ditch laid 4 dead women. All of the women that were found in this ditch were identified as sex workers in the area, and all of these women were laid extremely methodically. These women were all face down in the drainage ditch, roughly 6 feet apart from each other. All of their heads were pointed eastbound, and all of them were fully clothed except for having their socks and shoes removed. And all of them were strangled to death. The way that these women were killed and the way that their bodies were found is of course where the relatively twisted name of Eastbound Strangler came from. Now, basically everything I've just told you is almost everything that's currently known about the Eastbound Strangler. And unfortunately, that kind of just comes with the territory when you're talking about serial killers that are still on the loose. They're on the loose for a reason, and that's because not much is known, or at least not enough to find them, let alone convict them. And unfortunately, this leaves a lot of room to speculation. And I would argue that if this serial killer was at least strong enough to strangle and move the bodies of 4 women into a ditch, then it's likely that they weren't extremely old when these killings took place. And because these killings took place only 19 years ago, I would say it's very likely that whoever killed these 6 women is still alive today and possibly still active, because all of these 4 murders were only linked together because all of the bodies were found in the same place. But if this killer decided to just go in any other place in the country and kill somebody in any other way, well, nobody's going to really suspect the Eastbound Strangler. The Jeff Davis 8. Fortunately, the Jeff Davis 8 situation does have quite a bit of information surrounding it. However, this information, while not only upsetting, only leads to more questions than answers. The Jeff Davis 8, or the Jennings 8, refers to a series of murders that took place between 2005 and 2009 in the small town of Jennings, Louisiana. All 8 of the Jeff Davis 8 victims were women, but more interestingly than that, they were also connected to each other. Not only did they all live in similar circumstances of being young women struggling with poverty, drug use, and prostitution, but they also literally knew each other. Several of the victims in this case were also police informants, and some of these informants even ratted on each other to the same police station. And police station is something we'll discuss just. All 8 of these women were killed in similar ways and dumped in similar locations, with the murder methods used being strangulation, suffocation, or drowning. And the areas these bodies were dumped were either in swamps or canals in remote areas outside of Jennings. Now, it's reported that when these bodies were found, it's shown that there was an active attempt to have these bodies unidentifiable once found. And it's also suggested that whoever placed these bodies in these extremely remote locations was very familiar with the local terrain due to how specific these locations were and also how hard they were to get to. Off the bat, this case sounds like any of our other cases. Sure, a group of women unfortunately were killed and went missing because they lived in unfortunate situations and were vulnerable to psychopaths that were looking to kill innocent people. Serial killers that are still on the loose. According to the FBI, there could be up to 50 active serial killers in the United States right now. That's literally 1 serial killer for every state in the United States. For this year's Halloween special, I knew I wanted to talk about serial killers, but I also knew I wanted to make it extra creepy, which is why I wanted to discuss not serial killers who we all know and have been put to jail or put to death. I wanted to discuss serial killers that are currently active or still on the loose to this day. Being on the loose and being active are 2 different things, which is why this video is a bit of a double feature. I'm going to start by going through every serial killer who is still walking among us, and then I'm going to build up to not only serial killers who are on the loose, but are also on the loose and active to this very day. So without further ado, let's talk about killers that could technically kill you. The I-70 killer. The year is 1992. You are the manager working at a local shoe store, and you've just began your shift. Today was like any other day. You were alone in the store, and the store was quiet. That was until one peculiar-looking man walked in. He enters the store looking directly at you and doesn't say much, although he asks you if you could find something for him in the back. You oblige and walk in the back, only to realize you've been followed. And before you can understand what's going on, you hear the click of a gun, and your life flashes. Unfortunately, that is a real story of one of the victims of the I-70 killer. And this victim was one of many. The I-70 killer is named after the I-70 highway because every single one of the murders attributed to him has taken place only a few miles off of the highway. For those unfamiliar, the I-70 highway is one of the longest interstates or highways in the entire United States and runs from Utah to Maryland. That alone is an interesting fact we'll get into later, but more on the killer himself. It's believed that the I-70 killer was most active from 92 until 94. Although murders as recently as 2001 have also been attributed to him. Very little is known about the I-70 killer, and every murder that is associated with him is because of the extremely consistent methodology this man used. Almost every victim of the I-70 killer follows the same criteria. The victim was a woman working alone in a retail location only a few miles off the I-70 highway and was nearly clinically executed with a 22mm bullet to the back of the head. Now, interestingly, all of the murders attributed to the I-70 killer showed little to no signs of assault or robbery after the murder took place, meaning that this killer likely killed simply for the satisfaction of killing, which is just more evidence in case you weren't convinced that this person was twisted already. Now, it's important to note that there are a few murders from the I-70 killer that are a bit unorthodox. Specifically, a few murders that involved male victims, as well as a situation where two people were murdered at the same time, which was the first and only time that happened. And it's theorized by authorities that the I-70 killer believed one of the employees was alone, when in reality the employee and store owner were both present at the location, and the I-70 killer decided to kill both of these people. As of today, there's believed to be anywhere from 6 to over 9 killings attributed to the I-70 killer. And interestingly, with these murders taking place relatively recently, and the sheer volume of murders that took place, there is quite a bit of evidence and information taking place. But interestingly, even with technology that existed at the time, which was only the early 90s, and the technology that exists today, which is way more advanced, there is still absolutely no clue as to who the I-70 killer could be. And all we have are a few artist depictions based off of a few eyewitness accounts. My mind is still a bit blown that with over 6 active crime scenes that have all been extremely consistent in a relatively modern time period, we still have no real information, and it doesn't look like we're ever going to get any anytime soon. And for people who claim to have seen the I-70 killer, they said that they saw a skinny white man, roughly 5'7" to 5'9", in their 20s to 30s at the time. Authorities across the United States are still actively searching for the true identity of the I-70 killer to finally bring him to justice. And today, investigators believe that the I-70 killer is likely between the ages of 52 and 70, meaning that it's extremely likely that he's still alive and roaming the streets today. Although it's believed that he's either retired from killing or simply changed his methods so his new murders cannot be attributed to his now infamous persona.
He got too
the
old to
I-70
kill.
killer wasn't the only killer of this kind. There's also an I-70 strangler and an I-65 killer, but even those aren't all of them. And in a press release, the FBI has even stated explicitly that a disproportionate amount of murderers and serial killers have been truck drivers, simply because their lifestyle is so conducive for serial killing. They're consistently traveling city to city, they're hanging out in locations that are relatively temporary, rest stops, gas stations, and they always have a reason to be going somewhere. And truck drivers and trucks, for the most part, kind of fly under the radar. In regards to the I-70 killer specifically, the authorities don't know what his occupation was, but they do believe that he was either a truck driver, a drifter, or somebody who traveled on I-70 frequently for work. So I guess all I can say is, if you're traveling on I-70 and see a man who looks something like this, keep your distance. The Eastbound Strangler. The year is 2006. You and your dog are staying in a cheap motel outside of Atlantic City because you've fallen on pretty hard times, and you decide to go out for your daily walk. You walk your dog on the usual route around the motel when you notice that your dog is particularly inquisitive about something behind the motel. He keeps trying to draw you down to this drainage ditch, and while you're unwilling to go down there, you figure something suspicious is going on. You get back to your room and inform police, and after they arrive, they knock on your door and tell you that what you called them about was extremely concerning, and what was found in that drainage ditch was extremely disturbing. Inside that drainage ditch laid 4 dead women. All of the women that were found in this ditch were identified as sex workers in the area, and all of these women were laid extremely methodically. These women were all face down in the drainage ditch, roughly 6 feet apart from each other. All of their heads were pointed eastbound, and all of them were fully clothed except for having their socks and shoes removed. and all of them were strangled to death. The way that these women were killed and the way that their bodies were found is of course where the relatively twisted name of Eastbound Strangler came from. Now, basically everything I've just told you is almost everything that's currently known about the Eastbound Strangler. And unfortunately, that kind of just comes with the territory when you're talking about serial killers that are still on the loose. They're on the loose for a reason, and that's because not much is known, or at least not enough to find them, let alone convict them. And unfortunately, this leaves a lot of room to speculation. And I would argue that if this serial killer was at least strong enough to strangle and move the bodies of 4 women into a ditch, then it's likely that they weren't extremely old when these killings took place. And because these killings took place only 19 years ago, I would say it's very likely that whoever killed these 6 women is still alive today and possibly still active, because all of these 4 murders were only linked together because all of the bodies were found in the same place. But if this killer decided to just go in any other place in the country and kill somebody in any other way, well, nobody's going to really suspect the Eastbound Strangler.
Okay, so Albuquerque may have just had a serial killer and nobody even knew it. Do you remember that 18-year-old that just murdered that Uber driver for fun? Well, in court, he just admitted to 3 separate murders that he allegedly did in his juvenile years. And here's where it gets weird. He told the authorities that these murders were absolutely beautiful and made him see better at night, whatever that means. But what an absolute psychopath, because we all know this dude was just flicking through his phone, waiting for the perfect person, selected that one, and he was even mad after he killed that guy that this guy wasn't bigger. He was hoping to get like a buff bodybuilder, which is actually insane if you ask me. And now the police are actually investigating this to see if this guy's actually telling the truth. If he's lying, this is now either confirmed or denied. But here's what's crazy to me is there are so many homeless people that get randomly unalived in Albuquerque all the freaking time. And that's a perfect target for an absolute sicko like this. This is disturbing. This is sick. What do you guys think about this? Let me know down in the comments below. We'll see you later.
Freeway Phantom. On an ordinary evening, a 13-year-old girl left her home in southeast Washington, D.C. to buy groceries. She never came back. 6 days later, her body was found without shoes on a grassy hill beside I-295, behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital. She had been assaulted and killed. No one knew it yet, but Carol was the first victim of a man who would soon be known as the Freeway Phantom. A few months later, a 16-year-old disappeared while walking to her summer job. Witnesses saw her getting into an old black car with a man driving, but no one got the license plate number. 11 days later, her body was found only 15 feet from where the first girl's body had been discovered. The killer had chosen almost the same spot, as if to taunt investigators. Again, she was fully dressed but missing her shoes. Then came 10-year-old Brenda Faye Crockett. She went to the store and never came home. And that night, her family received 2 terrifying phone calls. Brenda was crying and saying a man had picked her up and that she was in a cab heading home. Then, in the second call, she asked, "Did my mother see me?" and said she was alone in a house with that white man. During that call, heavy footsteps could be heard in the background. Then she said, "I'll see you," and hung up. Hours later, a hitchhiker found her body. Police believe the phone calls were staged and that Brenda had been forced by her killer to make them in order to confuse investigators. Then, after yet another murder, the press gave the killer his name, the Freeway Phantom. The next victim was different in some ways, though 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard had dinner with a friend and caught a bus home around 11:30 p.m. The next morning, her body was found near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. She had been stabbed and strangled, but this time, she was still wearing her shoes, and inside her coat pocket was a note. It was written on a piece of paper torn from her school notebook. It said, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." The word tantamount caught detectives' attention, as it was formal and not a word most people used. After this, almost a year passed, and then yet another victim was killed. Then, out of nowhere, the murders just stopped. The investigation pulled in every major law enforcement agency, DC Police, Maryland Police, and even the FBI. But it soon became one of the most frustrating unsolved cases. Files went missing, evidence was mishandled, and every promising lead fell apart. Detectives interviewed hundreds of suspects, and one inmate even claimed to know who had committed one of the Freeway Phantom murders, and shared details only the killer would know under the agreement of remaining unidentified. But when a politician told the story to the press, the inmate shut down and refused to talk again. Years later, suspicion fell on a man named Robert Elwood Askins, who had a long and disturbing past. He poisoned prostitutes with whiskey laced with cyanide, killing one, and days later stabbed another woman to death. He was declared insane and sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the same hospital near where the first victim had been found. After his release, he murdered again and was later convicted of more assaults. Also, when police searched his home, they found court papers in which a judge had used the word tantamount, the same unusual word from the killer's note. Co-workers also said Askins liked to use that word often. But even with all that, no physical evidence linked him to the Freeway Phantom murders. Askins denied everything, saying he could never do such things, and he spent the rest of his life in prison for other crimes and died there in 2010. More than 50 years later, the Freeway Phantom case is still unsolved. A $150,000 reward still stands, and the case remains open.
Did you know a serial killer terrorized Louisiana for years, leaving DNA at every crime scene, but was never caught? In the early 2000s, young women across Louisiana started disappearing. Graduate student Pam Kinnemore was snatched from her own home in the middle of the night. Charlotte Murray Pace was stalked and murdered right after coming home from work. Their bodies were found at Whiskey Bay, a remote boat launch deep in the swamplands. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. The killer knew everything about these women, their schedules, their routines, where they lived. He had been watching them for weeks before he struck. DNA evidence linked the murders to multiple unsolved cases across the state. The FBI built a task force. They had his genetic profile. They knew he was out there. But 20 years later, the Whiskey Bay killer has never been identified. Investigators believe he claimed more victims whose bodies are still hidden somewhere in those vast Louisiana swamps. The DNA is sitting in a lab right now, waiting for a match that may never come. What's your theory on who this killer could be?
Really bizarre, potentially very disturbing situation taking place out in very remote, rugged western Colorado.
Yeah.
Basically, there's this YouTuber online known for his epoxy countertop YouTubing, Levi Comstock, who has suddenly uploaded 2 videos related to these odd discoveries that he made at this remote pond near the Book Cliffs area, which is kind of close to Grand Junction, close to the Colorado border with Utah. Comstock was out exploring this area just in his recreational time, doing some off-roading, and he stopped at this little area. There's this little pond there, a very small pond, wrapped kind of in this like old looking fence in the videos, and I think he said he was taking a leak is how he ended up in the spot. And then he looks down and he sees a pair of high heel shoes, so very out of place right here in the middle of nowhere. It's a part of the state too where it gets super muddy during certain times of the year, so you can't even drive a vehicle there during some points in the year. So basically he finds this high heel, finds another high heel, and then he starts looking around, and then all of a sudden, after he's kind of scouring this area over that day and a couple more days, I think, he ends up finding 10 pairs of fancy high heels / fancy boots, different sizes, right? So all different sizes, and they're all old. Some of them have broken parts to them, like broken heels off, for example, but they're all like covered in mud, just kind of scattered around this extremely remote pond that no one ever really goes to. He also reports that he found a t-shirt with rocks in it, and all this is on video. A t-shirt with rocks in it wrapped in wire.
Thank you guys for joining me for another banger. Be safe out there. There's creeps out there. Go and get your gun permits. Learn how to shoot. Protect your families. Protect your kids. Protect your wives. Protect your sister. Protect your mothers. It's a crazy world we live in. Until the next video, peace and love.